Tsaarin Venäjä aiheutti tahtomattaan populaarimusiikin synnyn. Antisemitismi ja rajut sortotoimet pakottivat miljoonat juutalaiset muuttamaan Amerikkaan. Pakolaisten joukossa olivat George Gershwinin vanhemmat ja 4-vuotias Izzy Berlin alias Irving Berlin. 30 seuraavana vuonna juutalaissiirtolaisten ja uuden kotimaan musiikin väliset jännitteet loivat populaarimusiikkiin uuden aikakauden.
I'll build a stairway to paradise with a new step every day.
I'm stepping out with my baby, can't go wrong, 'cause I'm in right. It's for sure, not for maybe, that I'm all dressed up tonight.
Suurin osa venäläisistä siirtolaisista, Gershwinit ja Berlinit mukaan lukien, eivät osanneet sanaakaan englantia saapuessaan New Yorkiin. He asettuivat itäiseen alakaupunkiin, joka oli kansallisuuksien sulatusuuni.
Because there were immigrants from so many other cultures, not just Jews, they were hearing the music of the Irish and the music of the Italians, and so they all combined. And perhaps the cross-fertilization of so many cultures that reached their ears. So there's a little Irish here and a little Italian there and a little Jewish there, and you can say they reflected the pulse of the city.
There were Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and they all hated each other cordially, and there were no contact, or the minimum of contact, between them. And I was told by my parents, for example, don't you play with the little nigger boys. So, of course, I went out and hunted up every black child I could find. There was no mixing as such. The blacks had their own group, separate ghettos of their own. The Jews had ghettos of their own.
Yksi harvoista mustista muusikoista, joita arvostettiin yli kansallisuusrajojen, oli Scott Joplin, ragtimen kuningas.
It was, I think, the first urban American music. It was the first music that is really about the city more than the country. It's about the fact that after slavery, these Negro American musicians had a certain kind of freedom of travel that allowed them to go from one city to another. We're no longer plantation work animals. We're out here now as city people.
Mustat tanssirytmit valtasivat New Yorkin. Nyt havahtuivat nuoret juutalaissiirtolaiset ja uusi sukupolvi käänsi selkänsä jiddishinkieliselle teatterille. Haluttiin kuunnella ja tehdä amerikkalaista musiikkia. George Gershwinin vanhemmat ostivat kehityksen nimissä pianon. Irving Berlin karkasi kotoa ja myi kadulla lehtiä. Hän teki lehtien tarinoista lauluja. Hän antoi uudelle musiikille vanhan nimen ragtime. Berlinin ragtime ei muistuttanut Scott Joplinin vastaavaa. Berlin poimi sanoitukset katukielestä ja rytmit suurkaupungin tanssilattioilta.
You see, back then in the 1910s, ragtime was the rock and roll of its period. Young people danced to it. It was the music of the skyscraper. It was the music of modern America. In fact, one of Berlin's first hits was the clarion call, the anthem, the rock around the clock of ragtime. And the song, of course, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Why is it that? Because from the very beginning of the song, he's telling people to get with it, get with the new trend. Come on and hear Alexander's ragtime band.
It's the best band in the land. They can play a bugle call like you never heard.
One of the essences of a popular song is the sound, the drive. It's just got a great inbuilt rhythmic feel to it.
Come on along, let me take you by the hand. Come on the man, he's the leader of the band.
At the end of the song, he does something which is very characteristic of the Berlin of those days. He quotes from an older song, and if you want to hear the Swanee River played in ragtime, very clever, because he's catching people by saying, well, you know, I'm not that new. I know about the past.
And if you got to hear the Swanee River in ragtime, come on and hear Alexander's ragtime.
The syncopated rhythms of ragtime really were something new. People had been used to popular music, which more or less aped, quote-unquote, high-class European music. And ragtime, with rhythms lifted from African-American music, really injected a kind of vivacity into American pop culture, which hadn't been there before. The hue and cry about ragtime, of course, was largely tinged with anti-black racism. Its jungle rhythms are forever being maligned, but also there's a strain of anti-Semitism there because they're talking about sort of the Jewish song merchants who are pushing this horrible jungle music on America's youth. And there are really hilarious newspaper articles in which, you know, doctors and other experts are interviewed when they talk about how the jagged, syncopated rhythms of ragtime are going to drive everyone to distraction and what they're going to do to the central nervous systems of America's youth and how women are going to be sold into white slavery as a result of this music. So certainly this music was breaking through to the mainstream and was perceived as a threat as a result. There's been a pattern in American pop music mainstream assimilating elements of African American music, smoothing them out and selling them to mainstream white America, and moreover selling them to mainstream white American youth. And ragtime really was the first major musical revolution that followed this process. Happens again with jazz in the 1920s, and it of course famously happens with rock and roll in the 50s, and today it's happened with hip-hop rap music.
Ennen Berlinin ragtimea New Yorkin musiikkimaailmaa hallitsivat vanhanaikaiset ballaadit ja yksinkertaiset musiikilliset karikatyyrit, joita kauppasivat Harry von Tiltzerin kaltaiset mahtimusiikkikustantajat.
The successful popular songwriter writes for the average piano player and the average singer. For instance, here is one of my coon songs. Rufus Rastus Johnson Brown, what you gonna do when the rain comes round? You'll notice the range of that song was only 6 notes. Why, a baby could almost sing it.
Mr. Rufus, Mr. Rastus, Mr. Johnson Brown, what you gonna do when that rent comes round? What you gonna say?
Näitä neekerilauluja olivat lähinnä esittäneet valkoiset laulajat. Kuvituksena käytetyt irvokkaat piirrokset kertoivat Amerikan mustien olemassaolosta siirtolaisille, jotka yhä pelkäsivät ja pilkkasivat tätä heille tuntematonta ilmiötä.
The impact that it had over a long period of time was that ragtime created these stereotypes of black people that black performers themselves found that they had to address when they got out of slavery and went into show business.
Varieteessa mustien esiintyjien piti tehdä itsestään pilkkaa ja laulaa kasvot vieläkin mustemmaksi lankattuina. Myös juutalaisnäyttelijät virnuilivat itselleen lavalla. Heistä oli parempi nauraa kuin tappaa toisiaan.
The odd thing is there is this incredible symbiotic relationship between the black and the Jew. Certainly, I mean, they're both oppressed peoples, but certainly musically we find this too.
Jotkut juutalaislaulajat tekeytyvät mustiksi. Al Johnson oli liettualaisen rabbin maahanmuuttajapoika, josta tuli Amerikassa tähti mustana laulajana. Yksi lankkinaaman suurimmista menestyksistä oli George Gershwinin sävellys.
I've been away from you a long time. I never thought I'd miss you so. Somehow I feel your love is real. Near you I want to be. The birds are singing, it is song time. The banjo strumming soft and low. I know that you yearn for me too. Swanee, you're calling me.
George Gershwin's first major hit, Swanee, sounds like it could have been written for a Yiddish musical on the Lower East Side. Even the introduction in the music is a traditional introduction used in a lot of Yiddish theater songs. It's Jewish. I've been away from you a long time. I never thought I'd miss you so. Da 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 dee dee. Sure, that sounds Jewish, but it also sounds Polish and Russian and German, and it's lament.
Swanee, how I love you, my dear old Swanee. I'd give the world to be among the folks in DIX. I even know my mammy's waiting for me, praying for me down by the Swanee. The folks up north won't see me no more when I get to that Swanee shore.
First thing about blackface is we have to understand that it comes out of minstrelsy. Minstrelsy was not invented to elevate Negroes. Minstrelsy was invented to get jobs for white guys who were imitating Negroes. The blackface is not just this performance mask. It's a rejection of his Jewish background and an embracing of American show business. So what we see there is that in a certain sense, blackface was also a window, if you will, through which Europeans could enter American show business. Now, what it became, ironically, was the first mass popular phenomenon in American culture.
Swanee oli nuoren George Gershwinin ensimmäinen menestys. Se oli tehty New Yorkin osassa, joka sai nimensä monen yhtä aikaa esiteltävän laulun äänestä Tin Pan Alley.
This is not art music. It was never intended to be a very specialized kind of a deal. Oh no, on the contrary, the more millions it could sell in sheet music and then in records, the better off you were. And so they were out to deliberately create hits. That's what Tin Pan Alley physically was and what it mentally is. It's a state of mind of commercialized popular music.
And on the other side, there's another Gershwin tune.
George listened very much to pianists of that period, black and white. He hung around all over New York, and so he listened to people like U.B. Blake. He listened to jazz pianists and ragtime pianists of that time. The advancement of American popular music at that time is due largely to the Jewish composers, but also to the black influence.
You know, now some people might complain that if you were white, even if you were Jewish, you got a better shot than if you were black and were Christian. Being a black Christian in a Christian country didn't help you as much as being white if you were Jewish helped you. See, George Gershwin doesn't represent Jews. He represents a genius first. He's a genius who is a Jew. You know, Irving Berlin is a popular songwriting genius who's a Jew, right? Duke Ellington is a genius who's black. But they all have one thing in common. They're geniuses first, and then their ethnic category comes second. But a lot of times people try to put the ethnic thing in first, as though we can understand genius by going through somebody's ethnicity. That we'll never be able to figure out. Because if being Jewish allowed you to produce a bunch of George Gershwins, believe me, we'd have a whole lot more out of here.
Say, do you know that you boys are a half hour late for this rehearsal?
George, I was never late in my life.
While we're waiting for them, let's take the chorus and the buck dance and strike up the band.
Good idea. All right, kids, come on, let's go.
The thing that makes them who they are, finally, is that they're able to both use and transcend their ethnic backgrounds. And that's the key thing to greatness in American art, that you can totally use your background and transcend it if your talent is sufficient.
Someday he'll come along, the man I love, and he'll be big and strong, the man I love. And when he comes my way, I'll do my best to make him stay.
Now, there's a progression that goes on there musically that's vintage Gershwin. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. He put those notes into his piano variation of it. And that is quintessential Gershwin. It is those blue notes, those bent notes, those notes that are a little bit off the beaten path that you don't expect to hear. And so he's taken a beautiful melody, da-dee-da-dee-da-dee, and he's put these blue notes juxtaposed next to it. That's what makes it vintage Gershwin.
Still I'm sure to meet him one day. Maybe Tuesday will be my good news day. He'll build a little home just meant for two, from which I'll never roam. Who would you? And all else above, I'm waiting for the man I love.
The music that was created in the teens and 20s by these great writers influenced the world, not only America, but it changed the way the world looked at America. And it changed culture because people learned things about the world from the popular songs. The popular songs dictated morals. They dictated ideas about love. They gave people ideas and notions of romantic love that people didn't carry prior to these songs being created. They were incredibly popular and incredibly valuable in their ability to influence people, and that's why they were used as propaganda.
It's your country and my country with millions of real fighting men.
Lauluntekijät Gershwin ja Berlin olivat yhä tietoisia juutalaisista siirtolaisjuuristaan, mutta halusivat ennen kaikkea tulla oikeiksi amerikkalaisiksi. Ensimmäisen maailmansodan aikaan Irving Berlin oli tehnyt monta isämaallista laulua. Amerikasta oli tullut hänelle uskonto.
In 1917, Irving Berlin was drafted into the army, and he served as a soldier. And this, of course, was a whole new experience for him, to have to get up at 5 or 6 a.m. to reveille. I mean, he'd never done anything like that, at least since he'd been a songwriter, because his habit of working was to work all night long and then go to sleep and wake up at about 4 p.m. So his whole life had been reversed. It was like a permanent jet lag for him. And so he used his experience of getting up at the horrendous early hour to write this song called "Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning." Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I'd rather remain in bed.
For the hardest blow of all is to hear the bugler call. You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead. I'll aim potatoes readily and step upon it heavily and spend the rest of my life in bed.
Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning was pure autobiography. And he wrote about that himself. That was a song from the heart, and when I was a child, that I knew was our family theme song. You know, and people will ask me, did your father sing you a lullaby? I say, yes. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning.
You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning. Someday you're going to murder the bugler. Someday you're going to find him dead.
And then I'll get that other pup, the guy who wakes the bugler up.
And spend the rest of my life in bed.
Irving Berlin was already a well-known songwriter, very wealthy, and he was invited to all kinds of social events by some of the best hostesses in town. And at one of them he met Mary Ellen Mackey, who was the daughter of the man who ran postal telegraphers, also a millionaire, with a big home out in Long Island and a house on East 75th Street. She was very beautiful, striking, tall, and they just hit it off. Then when it got to be too apparently romantic, the old boy, her father, Mackey, did everything he could to stop it. He didn't want her to have anything to do with a Jew and a common songwriter, and especially a Lower East Side Jew at that. And so he even sent her off on trips so that Berlin wouldn't see her for long periods of time.
Pakollisten erojen aikana Berlin sävelsi henkilökohtaisen ja oma-elämäkerrallisen laulun.
Of course, Berlin neither read nor wrote music. That doesn't matter. You can write some perfectly good songs like that. He used to play in one key. The key is F sharp, the black notes of the piano. I mean, almost everything you play in these black notes plays a nice tune, pentatonic scale. I think one day he did this. Oh, that's nice. And he wrote a pretty waltz called I'll Be Loving You Always. You see, it fits on the black notes.
I'll be loving you always. With all love and you always.
Always oli Irvingin häälahja Elinille. Sitä myytiin 1 miljoona ja molemmat rikastuivat entisestään.
I will understand always, always. Days may not be fair, always. Until I'll be there, always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always.
It's impossible to recreate today the impact that the courtship and subsequent marriage of Irving and Ellen created. There were headlines all over the place, and it was something that was fascinating to the public because it was really not proper in the eyes of many people for a Jew and a Gentile to marry. Berlin's family was more accepting of Ellen than Ellen's father. But of course, during the Depression, Ellen's father had terrible financial problems, and Berlin was the one who bailed him out. And after that, all was well with both families.
Berlinin perhe nautti Irvingin suosion hedelmistä kaukana New Yorkin juutalaisgetoista. Yhdessä suositun Gershwinin kanssa perhe seurusteli silmäätekevien kanssa. Berlin tunsi yläluokan avioliiton kautta, Gershwin soitti sille kulttuurelleissa konserttisaleissa. Gershwin uskoi, että kuolemattomuuden saavutti klassisessa musiikissa eikä viihdelauluilla.
public embraced this, embraced the fact that he had one foot in Tin Pan Alley and the other in Carnegie Hall. But the critics didn't like it. They distrusted it. And some of the other composers distrusted it, they felt it came too easily for him, therefore it couldn't be good. It wasn't dense and complicated enough. I mean, it just had to be something wrong with it. And so Gershwin labored with that. But his contribution to all writers who've followed him has been to break down the barriers between vernacular music and symphonic music, from the classical world and the popular world.
Drums roll, saxes moan, trumpets blast. Fascinating rhythm, you got me on the go. Fascinating rhythm, I'm all quiver. What a mess you're making, the neighbors want to know why I'm all shaking, just like a flipper.
When George Gershwin was writing a song called Fascinating Rhythm, the first title for this song was Syncopated City. Theaters were being built. It's when Broadway exploded with activity. You just hear the sound of the riveters, the buildings are going up. It was a sense of optimism and hope. You just have an enormous abundance of entertainment.
The 1920s and 30s, it seems to me, formed an extraordinary confluence of forces that made American popular culture flower. First, we had the development of radio, network radio.
George Gershwin, presiding over this program of modern music, presented for your entertainment by Phenamint, the chewing gum laxative. Remember, chew your laxative, and you will understand why over 15 million people have chosen Phenamint.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got finance, that's what anything more. I got daisies in green pastures, I got finance, that's what anything more. Old man Trouble, I don't mind him, you won't find him round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got finance, that's for anything more, that's for anything more.
We have radio for the first time disseminating songs overnight. Back in the 19th century, somebody like, let's say, Stephen Foster might write a song, and it would take a year before everybody would have an opportunity to hear it. Now, instantly, it was a hit. So the speed of everything, of cultural communication, was enormously heightened by commerce and technology.
Koko Amerikka oli liikkeessä. Mississippin jokilaivat toivat muassaan uutta improvisoitua jatsia. Louis Armstrongin kaltaiset esiintyjät olivat mukana viihteen muutoksessa.
One of the things that's most fascinating about playing with Louis Armstrong on the riverboat is that the first set that they played, this first dance set on the riverboat, nobody danced. There was just white people on the boat. Nobody danced because these white people had never seen an actual Negro in a tuxedo before. So they just kind of stared at them for the first show, kind of like, wow, Negroes in tuxedos, playing horns. Yeah. And then after about an hour of that, the next set they danced, right? But there's that moment. See, to me, that's like a signal moment about something in American society. That after all these minstrel shows and all that, right, to see Armstrong and Baby Dodds and Fate Marable and all of these other people in these tuxedos, beautifully dressed and playing this music, was like a shock. But again, they got used to it. And then they got out on this floor and tried to shake a tail feather, as it were. But that signal moment, I think, is something that tells us an enormous amount about what we were going to see more and more and more of in America.
Musta musiikki alettiin tiedostaa populaarikulttuurissa uudella tavalla. Jopa tähän asti Euroopan hillittyyn teatteriperinteeseen tukeutuneet säveltäjät alkoivat ottaa mustilta vaikutteita. Juutalaiset sukujuuret omaavat Jerome Kern ja Oscar Hammerstein lisäsivät ensi kertaa populaarimusiikkiin rotuteemoja.
Showboat, I think, is the single most important musical in the history of the American musical theater because it really marks a tremendous turning point. Never before had the American musical theater dealt with some of the themes that are inherent in Showboat. The intermarriage between people of two races, and then too the idea of a black and white cast appearing together in a Broadway show, unheard of. And that they were singing together on the stage at the same time was even more remarkable. So Showboat was a work of tremendous danger. The racial attitudes in the original version of Showboat, which no one has seen since the late 1930s because the show has been rewritten so many times, I think is a very daring one. It opens with a phenomenal quatrain. Niggers all work on the Mississippi. Niggers all work while the white folks play, loading up boats with the bales of cotton, getting no rest till the judgment day. Imagine what this meant to 1920s audiences, that the curtain would go up on this gala first night in this brand new, gleaming, beautiful theater. People, women dripping in diamonds and men in their top hats, white ties and tails, and seeing a chorus of black laborers lifting bales of cotton and singing that phenomenal quatrain. This was stunning, stupefying to those audiences. God, I hate political correctness. It always mucks up everything. And they keep changing niggers all work to darkies all work to colored folks work. Everything else I find racially denigrating. Niggers all work is the right word, because niggers is the word that those black people in the 1920s in the South that is being depicted in the show would use. Everything else looks like a liberal Caucasian's self-conscious acceptance of a situation they'd rather not be thinking about.
And me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and
Teatterilaivan uusi realismi kiteytyy sävelmässä, josta tuli Paul Robesonin tunnuslaulu kansalaisoikeustaistelussa.
drunk and your land's in jail. I get weary and sick of trying. I'm tired of living and scared of dying. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along.
Broadway alkoi kuvata amerikkalaista yhteiskuntaa uudella tavalla. Ei enää mustaksi maalattuja valkoisia eikä neekerilauluja. Lauluissaan aina kantaa ottanut Berlin perusti uuden musikaalinsa lehtiotsikkojen varaan.
It's very interesting indeed that Berlin started in the early days selling newspapers, because in 1933 he wrote a musical show called As Thousands Cheer, the conceit of which was newspaper headlines for which he wrote songs for every scene. And he wrote every kind of song for that show. For the weather report he wrote, "We're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave." So that was the weather page. He wrote the society page. "In your Easter bonnet," wrote that. Then there was a very poignant song, and there was a headline that said, "Black man lynched by mob," or "Negro man lynched by mob." And that's when Ethel Waters sang a song which was forever connected with her. Supper time, I must set the table, 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I ain't able, 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. That's an extraordinary achievement for Broadway in 1933 to have a song like that performed when an audience was very accustomed to light entertainment, and suddenly they're confronted with a very important social issue that was largely neglected at that time. Certainly, Berlin was thinking about his own family's exodus from Russia, all of the pogroms and demonstrations against Jews that caused the mass exodus of all those people to America and other places. And so he certainly felt very deeply about what he was writing, and it certainly shows in that piece of music, because musically it is very sophisticated, very Gershwin-esque in its harmonies, and perfect for Ethel Waters.
Supper time, I must set the table 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I ain't able 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. Supper time, kids will soon be yelling for their supper time. How'll I keep from telling them that man of mine ain't coming home no more?
That song is amazing because it was written for a specific thing. It was reflecting my father's feelings about an outrage. But it was also a most extraordinary song about loss.
Somehow I ain't able 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more.
It was a very daring thing to do. He had to pay for it in many ways. The other stars in the show, one was Clifton Webb, refused to come out and bow with Ethel Waters at the end of the show. And they refused for a few times, and he heard about it and said from now on, there'll be no bows at all. And so, of course, they changed their minds, didn't they? There were, of course, racial situations, and we were living in an entirely segregated society in America. There was no open rebellion, but people were certainly talking about the inequity of that. And as a young black child, I simply took that on the chin. I thought, well, this is the way it has to be.
Broadwaykin oli muuttumassa, eikä vain suhtautumisessaan rotukysymykseen. Kymmeniä näytelmiä jouduttiin ottamaan pois ohjelmistosta. Äänifilmin tulo toi valkokankaalle uuden realismin.
I walk a million miles for one of your smiles on my
Sitten iski pörssiromahdus. Lauluntekijät menettivät teatterinsa ja säästönsä, mutta Hollywoodin pelastava käsi kutsui heitä. Musikaaleihin tarvittiin kipeästi uusia lauluja. Ensin oli ostettu Tin Pan Alley ja sitten Broadwayn tähdet. Lopuksi hätiin kutsuttiin Berlin ja Gershwin ystävineen ja korvaukset olivat muhkeita. Kivenkovaksi juutalaiseksi liikemieheksi tituleerattu Irving Berlin sopeutui vaivatta vaativien Hollywood-tuottajien seuraan. Elämästä nauttiva, kameleonttimainen lauluntekijä väsäsi liudan menestyslauluja Hollywoodin uusille supertähdille. Jokainen Berlinin 5 laulusta oli radion uuden hittilistan kärjessä, kun varhainen popmusiikkibisnes otti ensiaskeleitaan ympäri Amerikkaa.
Why, I'm listening to the radio theater.
Gentlemen, you're about to be interviewed.
Wait till I fix my tie.
Don't you like being interviewed?
Well, I don't mind, as long as you don't ask us which we write first, the words or the music.
I'm not
Broadwayn lauluntekijöistä oli tullut tähtiä. Hollywoodin saapui pian heitä lisää. Richard Rodgers ja Lawrence Hart olivat nousseet maineeseen aiemman menestyslaulunsa Manhattanin myötä.
The dreams of a boy and girl will turn Manhattan into an isle of joy.
Filmin pätkässä Rodgers ja Hart kertoivat, miten turhauttavaa ja epävarmaa oli olla lauluntekijänä Hollywoodissa.
It's all your fault. My fault. All you did was talk about your lyrics. Why didn't you let me play the music for him? I'm sick of this racket. Now you'll have to go into the real estate business with your father. Come on.
Lawrence Hart was unhappy. He wrote a song with Rodgers called Glad to Be Unhappy, but I don't think he was glad to be unhappy at all. He suffered terribly and became impossible in the end for Rodgers to keep working with him because he drank too much and he just wasn't reliable.
Kyllästyneen lauluntekijöistä oli George Gershwin. Hän inhosi sitä, että sieluttomat tuottajat saivat päättää hänen musiikistaan. Luksuselämästä huolimatta hän tarvitsi uusia musiikillisia haasteita, joita ei Hollywoodin tapaan määräisi raha. Vuonna 1934 aloittiin harjoitella uutta musiikaalia, jota varten Gershwin oli tarkkaan tutkinut Etelä-Carolinan mustien elämää.
He liked to know things from the inside. And so he had a real emotional involvement with something. I mean, when he went south, I mean, he'd go to the churches and sing along with the church people in the churches. He'd go to the dances and dance. He would clap his hands. He'd get loud. He was an aggressive guy. He'd get all the way in there because he wanted to find out what that felt like in the middle of it. But in order to avoid the kind of simple-minded stuff that people engage in today that has nothing to do with the aesthetic process in which they talk about this white man stole this from that black person, this black person stole this from that white person. All artists who are serious steal. So if you're a serious artist and you don't steal, you need to be in another business. So if you're a serious artist, you seek out the very best thing that you can find and you snatch as much of that and put it in your stuff as you can. Now, if you have sufficient talent, you will remake that, and people will begin to recognize that that's your version of it. See, that's why Gershwin was absolutely fearless.
Porgy ja Bess muutti amerikkalaisten rasistiset viihdekäsitykset. Kaikki esiintyjät olivat mustia, ja ensi kertaa musta ja valkoinen yleisö istui oopperatalossa yhdessä. Kyyniset kriitikot syyttivät Porgya ja Bessiä Israelin ja Afrikan yhdistämisestä ja osuivat tietämättään oikeaan. Kansanooppera todella yhdisti symbolisesti mustan ja valkoisen musiikin, jotka olivat kehittyneet vaivalloisessa rinnakkaiselossa 30 vuoden ajan.
I'm sure by that time in George's career, the Jewish music and Negro music were in many ways the same as far as their source, where they came from. He wanted to express not only the story of Porgy, but he wanted to express the struggle of black culture in American history. He was writing very, very seriously at that time, and there was never a point in his collaboration, from what I'm told, that he was worried about not properly representing the black people. He simply knew that it was something he could do.
are jumping and the cotton is high. Oh, your daddy's rich and your ma is good looking. Don't you cry.
Sen jälkeen kun Gershwinit ja Berlinit saapuivat siirtolaisina New Yorkiin, valkoisten neekerilauluista ja nostalgiasta oli kehittynyt orastava populaarimusiikin kulttuuri. Mustien ja juutalaisten muusikkojen välinen jännitys oli luonut väkevän uuden musiikin, joka mullisti muotikäsitykset, moraalin ja ennakkoluulot Amerikassa ja muualla maailmassa.
And you take to the sky.
30 vuotta koti-Venäjältä paon jälkeen juutalaisperheet olivat kylväneet Amerikkaan nykyisten poplaulujen siemenet.